Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that Big 12 championship. We actually just talked about all four of the big time championships this upcoming weekend. Going to be a huge slate of games and definitely some ones that are going to be hugely impactful for the CFP race. But let's get into that CFP race. Let's talk about the tournament that is coming up and let's talk about the biggest questions that I have going into this one. And we'll start with Notre Dame. I want to talk about Notre Dame here really quickly. And the question I have is, can Notre Dame scale their performance? Do they have the ability to get up against a elite team like an Ohio State or like an Oregon and play at their level? Do they have the athletes on the outside to compete at that level? Because there's a couple of big time questions that I have with this team as we get into the playoff. One of the bigger ones is Riley Leonard. I think he's a very, very capable quarterback. I worry about those big time games. Is he able to, I don't want to say put them on his shoulders, but make the big time plays that he's going to need to make in the pass game, in the run game? Is he able to step up to that moment the way that Notre Dame fans really want him to? Now, USC and Louisville, I think, are both good wins, as is A&M to start the year, but they lack that elite win, as does a lot of people, if I'm being totally honest, in the CFP field. Quite a few of them lack that elite win, lack that game where you can see them against another elite opponent and say, okay, they can play and they can beat these elite teams. So definitely going to be one of those things to watch with a lot of teams in this race, but I think Notre Dame might be the most aggressive of the bunch, and I think when you talk about them more than anything, it's all about that wide receiver position. Can they find the difference maker at that position one way or the other? Can they find the guy that is going to really hurt a defense downfield? Because the way I look at this team right now is if it's just going to be the run game, if it's just going to be Riley Leonard, Jadarian Price, and Jeremiah Love, they're more than capable of making some plays. They're more than capable of putting pressure on defenses. They're not necessarily capable of outright winning a game against a Georgia or against an Alabama or against an elite team in this country. You got to be careful. You got to be able to find a couple of openings on the back end with Chris Mitchell, with Jaden Greathouse, with a lot of these wide receivers that are talented guys. You got to be able to push the ball downfield to them a little bit more aggressively. So I'm a little bit skeptical of this one. I think I'm skeptical of a lot of teams as we head into the CFP. That's what the 12-team playoff and expanded conferences gets you. But at this point, I think when you look at Notre Dame, I'm definitely worried about him. I think the biggest thing for me is the injury to Benjamin Morrison has shown up a lot in these big-time games, especially against USC last week. That was pretty glaring, and it will be glaring if they play in Oregon or they play in Ohio State. So I'm a little bit worried about them. I'm getting more and more bullish about Notre Dame going into this thing, but a little bit worried. I think we'll find out in a couple of weeks how much their really ability to raise their game to an elite level. But at the end of the day, when you have this guy, when you have Jeremiah Love, you can do a lot of things wrong and still do some pretty special things offensively. So it could just be one of those things where they need a game where he just takes over. He's more than capable of doing that. One of my favorite players in the country and definitely a guy that will have a huge impact on the CFP race. Now let's talk about Alabama. Is Alabama still Alabama? And frankly, it doesn't look like it throughout this year, if we're being totally honest. It's been a little bit all over the place. They've had the terrible performances against Vanderbilt and against Oklahoma. They've had great performances against LSU and against Georgia. So it's a battle back and forth. It's very, very hard to get an idea of what this team is and what this team can be going into this CFP race. And I think when you talk about this, there's always this air of, well, they just have to get in. If Alabama gets in, they'll find a way to get to the semifinals. They'll find a way to get to the championship. They might just win the championship, honestly. They've done it a couple of times in the 4-team, and people thought they were going to do it last year. They weren't quite able to do it. So it's kind of a complicated version. You've seen two different versions of Bama. You're wondering what happens? Which one do we get once we get into the CFP? They can play with anyone. They have that ability. When you have a guy like Jalen Milroe, you have the best athlete on the field, you're going to be able to make a lot of plays against some elite defenses. There's no doubt about that. Now, the question is, can they do that consistently? Can they make all the plays that they're going to need to make? Can they make them on a consistent basis? Because Jalen Milroe's great. I absolutely loved watching him. I think he's made some strides this year. He is not going to outright win you a game by precision passing. He is not going to outright win you a game if he's not the guy running the football. That is the way that he's a big-time factor. That's the way that he changes the game, and that's the way he's a nightmare to deal with. So it's one of those things where if Alabama's going to be Alabama, if they're going to be the team that just gets into the dance and then makes a lot of noise and beats a lot of these elite teams that people wouldn't necessarily like them against, it's pretty much going to be Jalen Milroe. It's pretty much going to be him being Superman throughout this postseason. I'd be a little bit surprised if that were to happen, but at the end of the day, they have the dudes on defense to make some plays, and they have the offense that can be explosive. I'm a little bit worried if they get into a little bit of a fist fight with some teams, but I think they're in a position where when you have that elite talent, especially when you have the quarterback, you're going to be able to do a lot of special things. I can't confirm that Alabama is still Alabama like we've known. I can confirm that they have that ability to get into the field and then get into the possible semifinals against someone and compete for a national title. Now we'll get into Oregon, and we talked about this when we were breaking down that game. Can Oregon stay mentally in the fight? This is the hardest thing all year. This is the hardest thing, especially this time of year, and usually is the decider of who wins a national title, who's on the outside looking in, is who can keep their cool, who can be the team that is more mentally focused, more mentally aware than a lot of the other teams around them. And Oregon's been one of the most impressive teams in the country, not because of their physical ability to me, not because they've been incredible at putting up a lot of points and getting to the quarterback and making plays on the back end and all of that stuff. They're mentally tough. They're one of the more mentally tough teams in the entire country. Dan Lanning brings that energy every single day, and we've seen a lot of the speeches that he brings. He definitely brings a lot of energy. It is a lot of juice into that team, and I think the biggest thing here is beyond Dan Lanning. You know you have the leadership there. Do you have it other places? Do you have Jordan James to fall back onto? Did Dylan Gabriel come in and become the leader that they were hoping he can be? Is Tez Johnson a big-time leader on this team? There's a ton of guys that need to step up in a big-time way because Dan Lanning has done a masterful job of getting this team ready to play, getting them up for games. The reality is, when it comes down to winning national titles, it comes down to the players. It comes down to the guys in those jerseys, putting those helmets on, that are going out there and working. Those are the guys that are going to have to lead you one way or the other, whether it's to a national title or on the outside looking in. That's what Oregon's going to find out over the next little bit. It seems like they have the mental toughness. It seems like they have the leadership. It's about to be tested a little bit more aggressively than it has all year. And then Ohio State. Are they done? Are they officially done? Because the question is really coming out of this game for the last 4 years has been, do they have the mental acuity to bounce back from this? Do they have the mental toughness to bounce back from this? And sometimes the answer has been yes in that Ohio State UGA game. The answer was yes. They battled pretty much that entire game. They missed by a little bit at the very end of it, obviously. But a lot of times, it hasn't been the case. It hasn't been the case where they could have walked into this game on Saturday and have flipped that switch. It's been 3 straight years where you've been embarrassed by that team. At some point, you got to flip the switch, and it's one of those things where I just haven't seen them do that in these moments. So I think they have that ability. I think they're one of those teams that has that ability to bounce back, has that ability to play elite football, has the ability to win a national title. They're also a team that I'm a little bit worried about mentally. And it's the weirdest thing to say because I'm not remotely worried about them physically. The talent on that team is undeniable. They have the most talent in the country. They have guys on the outside that are going to be absolute problems and play in the NFL for 10 years. They have one of the best running back duos in the country. A lot of things are to like about that team. That defense is absolutely ridiculous. So there's a million things to really enjoy about this team. The mental toughness is not one that I'm overly confident in right this second. I think they have the capability. Do they have the leadership that a lot of these other teams have? Do they have the toughness that a lot of these other teams have? And more than anything, do they have the offense to go along with that defense? Do they have the offense to make the plays? Do they have the quarterback to make some plays? And the defense is going to be there. There's no problem with that defense. There is going to be no problem with that defense throughout the CFP race. There could be a problem with that offense putting the defense in bad spots. So you're going to have to make sure that you kind of flush that one. You make sure that that one does not come into your vocabulary for the next 2 weeks, and you just go out, you make sure you get to work, and then get ready for whoever you're going to play. It's probably going to be Tennessee. It's going to be a battle one way or the other. If you struggle with the Michigan D-line, you're going to struggle with the Tennessee D-line. So you need to get back to work. It needs to be mental toughness. It needs to be physical toughness over the next little bit for Ohio State, or they really will be done. They really will be the team that was rolling right along, looked like they were a national title contender, and then it fell apart right when they saw that maize and blue. It's happened in the last couple of years, and they got to make sure that it doesn't happen again because you're barreling towards a very weird time in Columbus, Ohio if you fall out in the first couple of rounds in this tournament. So a lot of things going into this one. Is going to be fascinating to watch this team unfold the rest of the way. And then Quinn Ewers. He, to me, is maybe the most important player when it comes to this national title race because if he plays elite football, if he plays the football that he played in the second quarter against A&M or in the game against Michigan, Texas is going to win the national title. This team is too good on defense. They have every ability to push the ball downfield. If Quinn Ewers is making those plays, it's going to be a problem, especially with the way the run game is taken off. He's one of those guys that can really open up this thing. If he just doesn't make mistakes, if I'm being totally honest, if he just takes the play in front of him, if he makes the right play, continues to live for another down, it's going to be a really hard group to beat. You saw the A&M game. They had nothing going unless Texas was giving the ball away. Unless Texas was giving them opportunities, they were not having opportunities. So it's one of those openings where maybe that Texas defense can just take you to victory, but it's going to take Quinn Ewers not making the mistakes. It's going to take Quinn Ewers making the plays that he doesn't necessarily have to be special. He doesn't have to be the guy that totally takes over a game and goes for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns and puts up 50 points. He's got to put up 24. He's got to make sure that he doesn't turn the ball over. He's got to make sure that he has 5 yards per completion. It does not matter as long as the ball is moving downfield, as long as you are not giving the ball to the other team. This Texas team is remarkably hard to beat if they are not helping you. And it comes down to Quinn Ewers not helping the other team. He's plenty capable of doing it, but it's one of those things where a lot of things going into this one. The injury is a huge factor in this. Is he going to be able to be as mobile as he wants to? Is the defensive line going to be able to get after him? And will he be able to handle that on the other side of it? It's going to be a fascinating player. To me, it's the most powerful player in the CFP race. If he plays the football that he's capable of playing, Texas is going to win the national title. I can almost promise you that. If he falls a little bit short, which he has a number of times this year, Texas is going to fall a little bit short, and they're going to be wondering what happened on this season. But finally, who outside of the norm could get it done? Who outside the norm could make a little bit of a run here? Because there's a lot of teams that we love to see in. You know, you love to see Arizona State or Iowa State in the thing. You'd love to see SMU or Indiana or a couple of these other teams in the dance. I don't think anyone's thinking they're going to raise the trophy. I don't think anyone's really thinking they're going to get past that first matchup. So who could possibly do that? Arizona State or Iowa State is an interesting one to watch. I did pick Iowa State in this game, so I'd be leaning towards Iowa State, but I think both have the ability to do it because both really can play clean football, non-turnover football, and can possess the ball. That are the two biggest things when you talk about an upset or these types of games. Not turning over the football and possessing the football are the two most important things. If you're able to do that, you're going to have a lot of success. Both these teams can do that, and then they both have difference makers. Arizona State has one of the best running backs in the country. Iowa State has one of the best wide receiver duos in the country. So they have the difference makers when they need them, and then they can play the bogged down, grind you out type of game that is going to be tough for a lot of these teams. SMU is the team that maybe I like the most here. I might like the next team the most, if I'm being totally honest, but I'm battling back and forth. I think Kevin Jennings' ability on the outside to make some plays with his legs, also that run game in general, and that linebacker duo on the defensive side of the ball is going to be a problem. It is going to be incredible to watch that group kind of go to work and see if they can elevate their game to a different level, and I would absolutely love to see SMU go far in this one. It's such a fun team. It's a team that I've really, really enjoyed watching this year, and frankly, could be ranked a little bit higher than they are right now. So it's going to be awesome to watch what they can do this weekend and then going forward, hopefully, into the CFP if they don't fall out for Bama. If they do, then I'll be right on here yelling if I'm being totally honest. But going to be an awesome team. Cannot wait to see what they can do this weekend and beyond. But then this is the team. To me, this is the team that can make the most noise. Maybe it's not quite off the beaten path as people wanted it, but an elite D-line, an explosive offense that might just be finding it over the last couple of weeks, and then Dylan Sampson, an absolute problem. One of the best running backs in the country, a guy that can totally take over a game, and regardless of what the defensive line is on the other side, he's going to get his. He's going to make some plays. He's going to get some yards, and it's one of those things. They knock off Ohio State, then they're playing Oregon at a neutral site, and they can match Oregon in terms of physicality, or they're playing Penn State at a neutral site. Maybe they can make some plays. So they're one of those teams that I think is sitting right on the outside of that host position, probably will not get into that host position, but has the ability to walk into a different stadium, get a big-time win, and then continue rolling on. I think when you talk about Nico Iamaleava and this D-line that they have, you can do a lot of special things with those two things rolling the way that they are right now. So it's going to be awesome to watch all of this unfold. We will obviously be back tomorrow to update you on just about everything. We'll get into a couple of CFP hypotheticals, let you know what happens when UNLV wins, if Clemson wins, if Oregon and Texas lose. I'll break down all the different hypotheticals, at least the way that I see it. We'll get into early signing day wrap-up, all of that craziness tomorrow. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow for a little bit of a wrap-up before championship weekend.